Will was an ugly, useless, dirt-poor kid who had accidentally awakened legendary powers capable of wiping out all of human existence. Even so, he kept his abilities completely hidden just to pass as a normal boy. One ordinary afternoon, after coming home alone to his apartment, he cooked himself a meal. But before he could even get a single forkful in, he crashed out from pure exhaustion. When he opened his eyes again, he was staring at a totally different spread of food. He looked down at the plate, then at his reflection in the polished surface, and saw a face that was absolutely not his. Will had materialized as a little kid in another world, surrounded by musicians and a lively crowd. At first, he figured he just somehow ended up in a foreign country until he noticed everyone around him was speaking Japanese. That made him think he was dreaming. But the dream was way too real, especially when he actually tasted the food the moment it hit his tongue. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to wake himself up, but a voice called out to him, telling him to get up. An elderly man woke him and asked him to introduce himself to the guests. The man led him over to a group of people and kept insisting he say something. Will, now going by Shingo, felt a wave of panic with all those adults staring him down. That's when a slightly older boy named Erwin stepped in and introduced him as his little brother, explaining that his full name was way too long, and everyone just called him Will. Erwin sat down next to him and asked why he'd been so out of it before. When Will didn't say anything, Erwin just went ahead and broke it all down. Since Will was only 5, he'd explain everything. Today was the wedding of their oldest brother, Kurt, who had just married Amelie, the second daughter of the noble Main family. Their father had worked incredibly hard to find Kurt a bride, so when a nobleman's daughter actually said yes, he was absolutely over the moon. That's when Will realized this family was part of the noble class too. Later that night, people were drinking and cheering while Will was still struggling to adjust to his new body and the whole insane situation. But he felt a small wave of relief when he realized he could understand the language, and even read the signs. Judging by the celebration, he figured the family was loaded, and since he was the third son, he thought he wouldn't have to stress about work or food, so he just picked up his fork and kept eating like nothing weird had happened at all. But the good vibes didn't last. The next morning, Will got hit with a gut punch when he saw breakfast. Nothing but hard, stale bread and a watery, flavorless bowl of soup. What messed him up even more was that the family ate it like it was completely normal. Looking around, he noticed peeling wallpaper and a beat-up wooden table held together with nails. When Erwin came back from a hunting trip, Will asked, completely confused, "Didn't you throw that huge party yesterday? Why do we look so broke right now?" Erwin explained that they couldn't look like a mess in front of the wedding guests and had to keep up appearances. In reality, they were flat broke. They covered the cracked walls with curtains and only served decent food on the night of the wedding. Now everything had snapped back to the usual routine: stale bread and watery soup. Will, still in shock, had imagined that being the third son of a noble family at least meant inheriting some small piece of land. But another surprise dropped when Erwin greeted a brother named Helmut. Moments later, 2 more guys showed up, his brothers Paul and Herman. Erwin also mentioned that 2 other brothers hadn't even made it to the wedding. Right then, it all clicked for Will. The family wasn't just poor. He was the 8th son of a flat-broke noble family. Will started trying to wrap his head around where he actually fit in this world. They lived in a kingdom called Helmut, whose capital was home to nearly 1 million people. Far to the south was the Duchy of Bleer, and beyond that the rural area where they lived, the land of the Balmanites, a backwater with only about 800 people. And Will was the 8th son of that crumbling noble family. Suffocated by the limits of his new life, Will noticed 3 of his brothers saying goodbye to their mom. He ran after them to find out what was going on. Erwin explained they were leaving. The land wouldn't be split between everyone. The oldest brother, Kurt, would inherit everything, while Herman would marry into an affiliated family. The rest of the brothers would have to start from scratch in the capital and would no longer hold noble status. Erwin told Will to focus on his studies, since that was the only thing that could actually help him. And then he left, leaving Will completely heartbroken as he watched his brothers go. Will headed straight to the family library to prep for his uncertain future, but all he found were poetry books and romance novels. While putting one back on the shelf, he accidentally knocked a box down from the top. Inside was a sheet of paper and a crystal orb. The paper explained that the orb was a magic test stone, used to measure someone's ability to use magic. Will almost brushed it off. Magic wasn't real, after all, until he remembered he was now living in a completely different world. Reading further, he found out that only 1 in 1,000 people had enough mana to cast spells. His hopes dropped, but he kept reading. The paper said that magical talent wasn't hereditary. Anyone could potentially have it. The orb was simply the tool to reveal it. Not really expecting to get that lucky, Will still decided to give it a shot. He placed the orb on the table and tried pouring mana into it. Just as expected, nothing happened. Until suddenly, the orb blazed with an intense white light. In that same instant, a long-haired man deep in the forest felt something unusual. Back at the estate, Will was still staring wide-eyed at what he'd just seen. He picked up the paper again, looking for some kind of explanation. It said that if the orb shone with great intensity, it meant the person had an exceptional magical ability, and that they should study magic under specialized instructors. Will tore through the entire library searching for those kinds of books, but all he found were novels, travel stories, and poetry. Not a single book on magic. While he was still searching, his father walked into the library and found him. Will asked if they had any more books, but his father admitted he couldn't read, and that those were the only books they owned. Then he told Will to head into the forest and gather firewood. Out in the forest, Will tried casting magic using a tree branch, but no matter how hard he tried, nothing worked. The frustration kept building. Then out of nowhere, he heard a voice calling to him. It was a long-haired man descending from the sky. The man seemed genuinely thrilled to find him and asked for his name, but Will, completely spooked, tried to threaten him with the branch he was holding. The man apologized for scaring him and calmly took the branch out of his hand, tossing it aside. Then he explained that he was a mage. As it turned out, the branch fell off a cliff and struck a massive boulder, sending it rolling down the hill. When Will and the man looked below, they saw the rock had slammed right into a giant boar. The boar heaved the rock up and locked eyes on them, absolutely convinced they'd tried to kill it, and it charged. Terrified, Will tried to bolt, but the mage grabbed his arm, stopping him from running, and stretched his hand out toward the boar. He told Will to visualize wind magic. Even while shaking, Will listened as the mage instructed him to picture the flow of mana through his body. Both of them glowed with a green light as the mana concentrated in Will's hand. When the boar closed in and Will completely panicked, the spell finally took shape, and a powerful gust of wind exploded from his palm, sending the boar flying back. The attack only made the creature angrier. This time, the mage used his own magic and hurled the animal far, far away. After that, he introduced himself. Alfred Rainford, former mage of the Duchy of Bleer. He told Will he was talented, and that one day Will would surpass him. When Will got home, frustration hung over their meal. Dinner was nothing but a light tea that basically tasted like plain water, nothing like the delicious tea he'd had with Alfred. After the run-in with the boar, Alfred had sat down with Will, shared some tea, and said he wanted to teach him magic. Will was caught off guard by the offer and explained he had no way to pay for anything. But Alfred assured him he didn't need money. He just wanted a student. Before they started training, he warned Will to keep the magic a secret. If people found out about his talent, they might try to make him the next family head instead of Kurt, which would stir up a whole mess with the line of succession. Will, being a little kid, didn't really get what the big deal was. Alfred then explained just how powerful magic truly was, way beyond anything Will had imagined. Will immediately promised to keep it all under wraps. The next day, the first training session began, focused on capacity adjustment. Will needed to match his mana capacity to someone with more mana than him. The two of them held hands and started circulating mana through their bodies. Will was blown away by the strength of Alfred's mana, and Alfred congratulated him for keeping up. He'd been worried Will wouldn't be able to match his capacity, since mana capacity was determined at birth. But Will didn't just match Alfred's mana, he surpassed it and still hadn't hit his limit. Will's talent was beyond anything Alfred had ever seen. Meanwhile, back home, Will's father stared at the magic orb sitting on the library shelf, confused by the fact that it had been moved. He remembered Will had been there a few days ago and laughed it off. Kurt laughed along with him, convinced Will had just been disappointed to find out he had no magical talent. But in reality, Will was right in the middle of fire magic training. Alfred applauded him for picking up such an advanced spell after only a few days of practice. Alfred had also brought a basket of mountain vegetables, so the family would think Will had simply been out picking produce in the forest. That afternoon, the family praised Will for how much he'd brought back, but Kurt got antsy and asked where exactly he'd found that specific type of vegetable. Their father pointed out that this plant grew on the opposite side of the river, where there was no bridge. Had Will flown over there using magic? The father laughed at the idea, but Kurt was starting to seriously suspect that Will actually had magical powers. A few days later, Will and Alfred were soaring high above the ground while Will practiced tracking magic. He felt the vibrations of the terrain below, and once he locked onto the target, launched a wind-propelled stone that nailed a bird mid-flight. They cooked it together and ate. Will grabbed a bottle of hot sauce and offered it to Alfred, but Alfred didn't feel a single bit of heat. While they ate, Alfred warned him not to wander into the deeper parts of the forest. There were monsters way beyond his level, along with treasures and rare herbs. But anyone who went in never came back out. After the meal, Will confessed to Alfred that he felt like Kurt was watching him. Wherever he went, Kurt was right behind him. Alfred realized Kurt had figured out that Will had magic and was scared for his position as the next family head. But Will had zero desire to lead the family. He only saw problems with it and didn't want to cause conflict between his brothers. At the same time, he had no idea what he actually wanted to do with his life. Alfred suggested he become an adventurer. The idea clicked with Will, and he started thinking about the future. Then suddenly, a demonic aura flared up on Alfred's arm. He immediately grabbed it and hid it from Will, forcing the aura back down with great difficulty. He knew the time hadn't come yet. At dinner, Will announced to the family that he planned to become an adventurer. The oldest brother was pumped, because that meant Will, but their father said they had no money to enroll him in an adventurer academy. At the next training session, Alfred showed Will the city where the academy was located. BR, a merchant city where a lot of people joined traders' guilds. Will realized he could earn money and sell goods there, but first, he needed to learn how to get around. The method was teleportation magic, specifically flight magic. Alfred grabbed Will by the arms and lifted him up into the sky. At first, Will screamed like a little kid, until Alfred slowed things down. Once they reached the top, Will was left in awe at the breathtaking view of the vast world he now lived in. That night, Alfred faced the curse attacking him once again. The next day, Will trained flight magic. Alfred said this would be their last session together. Will begged him not to go, since they'd barely trained for 2 weeks. But Alfred silenced him and said the decision was final. During dinner, their father mentioned that a death whisper had appeared in the forest. He explained it was a walking corpse with a human appearance capable of speech, but was dead and felt nothing. After a few years, such a creature would become a mindless zombie. Will then remembered that Alfred's body had felt cold, and that he could eat the spicy sauce without any reaction. Fear crept in and he flew into the dark forest searching for him. He fell several times because of the darkness, but finally found him. Will warned him about the undead creature in the forest and tried to drag him away, but Alfred confessed that he himself was the death whisperer. He explained that 5 years ago, he had accompanied the Duke in search of medicine for his sick son. They were attacked by an army of monsters. Alfred fought to protect the Duke, but the monsters were too many and his mana ran dry. Because he carried a deep regret and one final burning wish, he had transformed into a walking corpse. That final wish was to pass his magical knowledge on to someone. When Alfred realized Will had found him, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over him. He could finally rest. Only one test remained for Will, to purify him using sacred magic. Will refused at first, but Alfred showed him how death was spreading rapidly through his body, and that he would soon lose consciousness and become a mindless zombie. He began teaching Will about light magic, and as Will recited the incantation, the black aura surrounding Alfred started to burn. Alfred screamed in pain, and even so, he kept encouraging Will to keep going. Tears rolled down Will's face. He didn't want to say goodbye to his teacher, but Alfred told him to remember everything he had taught him. Will thought back through every lesson, bowed his head and said thank you, before finally freeing his master from the suffering of being a walking corpse. Alfred let out a weak laugh as he slowly faded into the light, telling him to go out and live his life. Will wiped his tears, overwhelmed with grief, and promised to honor his teacher's last words. Years later, Will said goodbye to his mother and left home behind, chasing the dream of becoming an adventurer. The Adventurer Academy was buzzing with students in training. In one of the classrooms, new students were going around introducing themselves. A blue-haired girl introduced herself as Louise, and another named Ina followed. After Will gave his introduction, the instructor handed out forms to fill out. It was every student's nightmare, especially Will's, because the form required forming teams for group work. At dinner, Will sat alone at his table with nobody beside him. Nearby, Louise and Ina sat together. They quickly noticed that Will was the only scholarship student in the class. Another student, Erwin, said Will's magical power was so off the charts that even the instructor had admitted he had nothing left to teach him. He added that anyone who joined Will's team would basically coast through the academy, which was exactly why everyone was keeping their distance. But Erwin had a plan. He believed Will was alone because he was still sizing up the students. So if all of them challenged him, Erwin as the top swordsman, Louise as the strongest fighter, and Ina as the best lancer, maybe they could convince him to join their team. Meanwhile, Will had absolutely no idea what they were thinking. He decided he wanted to make friends with them and offered some spices he'd brought along. But before he could continue, a group of students walked in and announced that Will would be joining their axe squad and nobody else's. Will didn't even know what they were talking about. Feeling the sting of how close everyone else seemed, he quietly went back to his seat. In the next class, the instructors sent them out to hunt. Will was excited to form a team, but found out everyone had already grouped up. At another table, Louise asked if they should invite him, but Erwin said no. He believed Will being alone was a direct challenge to them, which meant they needed to hunt more than him to get on his level. Hours later, the students presented their catches to the instructor. Erwin's team proudly laid out 3 full boars. When Will walked in, he opened the magic bag he'd received from Alfred and started pulling out animal after animal until the entire table was covered. After witnessing all that raw power, the Axe Trio gave up on recruiting him and the students cleared the hall. Will, never meaning to intimidate anyone, received payment for the hunt. He wanted to invite everyone to dinner, but when he turned around, there was nobody left. That night, Erwin told the girls about his life, which turned out to be a lot like theirs. Since they weren't the oldest children, they were always treated like they didn't matter. Worse, when their talents emerged and they became stronger than their own relatives, their parents and siblings avoided them out of shame. They felt their dreams slipping through their fingers because of birth order, so they made a vow they wouldn't give up. They promised to make Will acknowledge them and their abilities. The next day, Erwin, Louise, and Ina pushed into the deep forest. They were quickly ambushed by a wave of wolves. Luckily, Will was nearby hunting. He sensed them through his tracking magic and thought that saving them might actually be a solid way to make friends. He sprinted toward the scene. Erwin, Louise, and Ina were fighting desperately, but the wolves just kept coming. Erwin got hurt and more wolves kept pouring in until Will arrived. With a single spell, rocks burst from the ground and formed a barrier that stopped anything from getting through. After the incident, the 3 of them apologized to Will, explaining they just wanted him to recognize them. Will was confused, but they admitted that the spell he'd used was S rank, a level so far above anything they could ever reach, so they decided to drop the idea of teaming up with him. Will almost called them back, but the instructor came in buzzing with excitement and announced that the Duke had invited everyone to a banquet. The whole class started talking about what a big deal the invitation was, until someone pointed out they were definitely invited because the Duke wanted to meet their amazing classmate, Will. Hearing that, Will felt uncomfortable with how they were putting themselves down like that. The only ones who didn't react much were Erwin, Louise, and Ina, too busy stressing about what they were going to wear. At the banquet, it became clear the classmate had been right. The Duke entered the hall, ignored literally everyone else, and walked straight toward Will. He introduced himself as Amadeus, greeted Will, and invited him to a private meeting. But Will shocked everyone by inviting Louise, Ina, and Erwin to come along, publicly declaring them as his team. At Duke Amadeus's palace, the Duke introduced Will to his royal mage, Bran, who had been Alfred's teacher in the past. Bran explained that 7 years ago he had felt Alfred's presence vanish. Since Alfred was a walking corpse, Bran had assumed he had fulfilled his last wish and found a student. Noticing that Will came from the same region where Alfred had died and that he was carrying Alfred's magic bag, Bran asked, "Are you Alfred's student?" Will admitted it. When Bran asked how Alfred had died, Will told him he had purified him with sacred magic. Bran felt a pang of sadness that a child had been the one responsible for freeing his teacher, but thanked Will for finally giving Alfred peace. After the meeting, Will returned everything that had been inside the bag. After the encounter, Ina and the others talked over what they'd heard. They felt ashamed for having judged Will so harshly. They realized he was exactly like them, a younger son of a noble family who had never been valued. When Will joined them, they apologized and admitted they had been planning to use his power to get ahead if he joined their team. Will laughed and admitted he was using them too. He simply hadn't wanted to sit alone in front of a scary Duke, so he dragged them along. Then he added that he genuinely did want to form a team with them. Everyone burst out laughing and welcomed him with open arms. Suddenly, the Duke walked in and told Will he would receive a reward for returning Alfred's belongings. The reward was 1,000 gold coins, and on top of that, he would inherit all of Alfred's assets. That night, Will had dinner in his new mansion. The place was so massive that he felt lonely again. He thought, what if my friends moved in with me? Sometime later, Will and his friends were traveling on a magical airship, heading to the capital for Erwin's wedding. Louise was beyond excited and wearing an over-the-top outfit to turn heads. Erwin was death-gripping a pole, absolutely terrified of falling. Bran, serving as their guide, assured him the ship would never go down. But suddenly the clouds turned dark, and a massive bone dragon appeared. Many passengers nearly lost it from sheer terror and started screaming at the crew. The crew tried to calm them down by reminding everyone that the great mage Bran was on board. But in reality, Bran, inside the control room, was refusing to fight. He didn't know how to take down an undead dragon because he didn't use sacred magic, but he knew someone who did. His eyes landed on Will. Will tried to say no, but Bran told him he could do it, just like Alfred had before. Using flight magic, Will launched himself toward the dragon. The creature exhaled a black mist, but Will raised a barrier at the last second. The ship was protected by a massive barrier Bran had created. Will started throwing sacred spells, drawing the dragon's attention. It dove straight at Will, but Will dodged smoothly using flight magic. Finally, he completed the incantation and hit the dragon with sacred light. The dragon tried to fight back, but Will's spell shattered its attack and damaged its body. When it was nearly finished, the dragon refused to go down alone. It launched one last desperate attack. Will threw up a protective barrier around himself, and moments later, the dragon collapsed, bones scattering everywhere. He collected the bones into the magic bag, and among them, found a dragon gem. A massive roar of celebration erupted from the passengers. Bran then introduced them to one of his old teammates, Ortio, who had become a merchant. The next day, everyone was wrecked from the absolute chaos of the celebration, except Will and his friends, who were gazing ahead at the capital waiting for them. When they arrived, Bran immediately bailed and disappeared, leaving them in the care of the merchant Oreo. That's when the king's knights approached. They thanked Will for taking down the dragon and requested he come to the castle. His friends left him at the gate, saying they'd head ahead to Erwin's family home. Will went inside with Oreo to meet the king. During the meeting, the king granted Will the title of 6th rank baron as a reward for his bravery. At Erwin's house, Bran and the others were discussing Will's sudden promotion. Erwin couldn't believe it. How could his little brother end up with a higher title than their own father? The title even allowed Will to start a new noble lineage. His friends worried he would stop adventuring with them, but Bran reassured them that the title wouldn't hold him back. Meanwhile, at the castle, Will was already drowning. Nobles argued back and forth about the price of the dragon's bones and the gem he had brought. One wanted the price slashed while another pushed to drive it as high as possible. Then Hall, the priest, stepped in and rescued Will, telling the nobles they needed to buy the items at a fair price and wrap it up. Throughout all of this, Oreo explained to Will that every person in that room was trying to pull him to their side, from the merchant trying to get the items at the highest possible price to Hall, hoping to recruit him for the church. After a while, Will was finally free to leave. But the moment he stepped out of the castle, a man started yelling at him and waving a spear around. Oreo explained it was probably a knight wanting to become one of his vassals. Fortunately, the guards grabbed the man quickly and dragged him away. At Erwin's wedding, Will noticed the older brothers looked stressed out. They still hadn't prepared the family's wedding gift, and that would make them look completely classless in front of the other nobles. Helmet had sent word that there was no money. Worse still, it would taint the reputation of the duchy they served under. People might think Duke Amadeus had refused to support them, since nobles were expected to back their vassals, but their father's pride stopped him from asking for help. When Will saw how stressed they all looked, he immediately stepped up and said he would cover the wedding gift himself. Erwin's wedding went off without a hitch, and Will clapped with pure joy. After the ceremony, Ortio handed Will a jar containing something he'd been searching all over the city for, a jar of soybeans. Will teleported with his friends to the new mansion. They spent the entire night cooking the soybeans, with Will using magic to speed up the fermentation, all of it to prepare a delicious soup. When they were done, they all sat together. Will, his friends, and his family, everyone enjoying the meal he'd made. And with that, Will quietly made a promise to himself that he would become the best noble he possibly could. After that, Will went to be baptized with Hole, thanking him for all his help and offering a generous gift. Just then, someone knocked at the door and walked in carrying tea. Will froze the moment he saw the girl holding the tray. She introduced herself as Elise, Hall's granddaughter. The instant Will stood up to introduce himself, he felt something unusual about her. He realized she had magical power. Hall confirmed it and revealed that Elise possessed sacred healing magic, a remarkable ability, especially since Will himself only mastered sacred purification magic. Elise helped heal the injured at the church and had received the title of saint. But the truth was that Hall wanted Elise to live a normal life and eventually get married, since she came from a noble family. He'd received many marriage proposals for her. Will jokingly said he'd throw his name in the ring, but added that he was still too young. Hall agreed they could marry when they were older. Will laughed and nodded along, but it was a pretty lonely laugh because he suddenly found himself engaged to Elise right there at their very first meeting. Later, Hall sat in the garden drinking tea and debated with his servant whether the engagement was right or wrong. He had already secured the king's approval, which meant not even Duke Amadeus, Will's superior, could oppose it. More importantly, they both understood the advantage of tying Will to their family. First, the gift he had presented, a chest of gold, showed that Will understood the church's power. And since their family held the rank of Viscount, marrying Elise to a talented young baron like Will would be a meaningful gain for them. Back at his brother's house, Will filled his team in on the engagement. Everyone was happy for him, except Will himself, who was the only one not feeling it. He wanted to actually get to know the girl before being locked in, but his friends explained that in this world it was completely normal to marry someone you didn't know. Even Erwin hadn't met his wife until the day of the wedding, so they asked him to close his eyes while they applied clown makeup on him. Disguised as a clown, Will was able to wander around the capital without anyone recognizing him as the Dragon Slayer. Erwin then told him to buy something for his future wife, which made Will start wondering what Elise actually thought about all of this. After finishing up the shopping, he ran into the same guy who had tried to become one of his vassals before. Erwin had assured everyone that no one would recognize him in clown gear, but the man ID'd him immediately by his teeth. Within minutes, a crowd had swarmed around him and knights started begging Will to hire them. Meanwhile, the same guy was showing off his spear skills, spinning it wildly in every direction. Will teleported out of there before the whole thing could spiral into complete chaos. Back home, Erwin said the best move was to pick a personal vassal right away, so he could turn down everyone else's requests. Erwin shot his hand up enthusiastically and offered to become his vassal. Will agreed on the spot. Erwin froze in shock, completely unable to believe he'd been hired that easily. Will then grabbed the gift he'd bought for Elise and headed out. Erwin stood there, still stunned. Using teleportation, Will slipped into the Hall family mansion unseen, but Hall almost caught him, forcing Will to hide. When Elise spotted him, he grabbed her hand and hid with her before her grandfather could see them. They snuck up to the terrace, where Will pulled out the cookies he'd bought for her, completely crushed from all the running. He hid the cookies behind his back and asked if they could talk for a moment. When he brought up the engagement, Elise smiled and said she was happy about it. Her grandfather had chosen Will, and she was glad to be marrying the Dragon Slayer. Back home, Erwin told Ina and Louise that he was now Will's official vassal. The two girls were not pleased. They'd spent the whole day shopping for nothing. They started thinking about asking Will for titles too. But Erwin gave that smug little laugh and said they'd work under him, since he was the first vassal. When he stepped out with the couple, Louise had a new idea, one that would put her above Erwin. She and Ina could become Will's concubines. When Will arrived, Louise tried to get his attention with her new outfit and some weird gestures, but Will didn't catch a single hint and walked right past her. That night, Louise ripped up her new clothes to make them more eye-catching, egged on by Ina. She admitted she was doing it, hoping her family would finally recognize her once she married Will and opened her own dojo. Ina felt just as determined. Meanwhile, Will received an invitation to have dinner with Elise. The next day, Will and Elise had dinner together. Afterward, Will was about to leave when Hall's servants approached and said he should give Elise a gift to mark their first outing together. So the two of them headed to a nearby jewelry shop. The store was packed with rings and gemstones in all kinds of colors and shapes. To Will, everything looked cheap and boring. Elise gently said he didn't need to pick something expensive, but Will assured her he had plenty of money, especially after the dragon reward. He noticed a simple ring in the corner. The seller suggested he pick something else, saying it was too plain for an engagement. But Will caught the excitement in Elise's eyes and decided to buy it. It cost 6 times more than the other rings because it was made from magic stone. After buying it, they headed back by carriage. On the way, Elise asked if he had noticed the ring was made from magic stone. The seller had said it could store large amounts of magical energy, so she figured that was why he'd bought it. But Will clarified that wasn't the reason. He simply thought it suited her. Will then admitted that his time in the capital had been stressful, mainly because everyone was pressuring him as the Dragon Slayer. At the same time, he admired Elise, who had spent her whole life carrying the pressure of being a saint. Then he channeled magic into the ring, lighting up the carriage with a red glow and creating an illusion of lights like stars floating all around them. Will was mesmerized by the sight, while Elise stared at him, caught off guard by his honesty. That night, Hall asked his servant what he thought of Will. The servant said Will was hard to read, but he'd noticed one important thing. Will was the only person who treated Elise not as a saint, but simply as a normal girl. Erwin, Louise, and Ina were enjoying their time in the capital. Erwin asked the girls how the whole plan to win over Will was going, but they said they weren't in a rush. Will was already tied up with Elise, so they decided to wait until he got back. Suddenly, Elise walked in. Good thing she hadn't heard any of that. Erwin mentioned that Will had been summoned to the castle, but Elise had come specifically to meet them. She wanted to know what kind of person Will was, from his friend's point of view. At the castle, the king asked Will to take down another dragon. Since Will served the king, he had no choice but to accept. The knight commander briefed Will and Bran. The capital was suffering from food shortages, and they wanted to develop the neighboring lands. But those lands belonged to an ancient dragon named Grior. To defeat a creature like that, they needed powerful mages. That's why Will and Bran had been summoned. Will wondered whether they could actually pull off defeating an ancient dragon. The king assured him that someone else would be joining them. A man entered, greeted them, bowed before the king, and declared enthusiastically that the 3 of them would head out immediately to take down the dragon. It was Arms, the palace mage. Despite looking like a straight-up brawler, he was actually an incredibly powerful mage. The three of them took off together in flight. Arms shot ahead at a speed that left Will stunned. They were headed for the army encampment, where they would map out their strategy before the battle. At Erwin's house, Erwin filled in the others on the details of Will's mission. Will wouldn't just be killing the dragon. When the dragon died, the surrounding monsters could flood into the villages. Will would have to take them all out too. On top of that, he was authorized to form a temporary army. The group wondered why they hadn't assigned the mission to a noble with an established army. Erwin explained it was a political thing. If a landowning noble took the mission, they could claim the territory afterward. But Will was a title-only noble, no land, so he would receive only money and a medal, with the land staying under the royal family. Right then, noise exploded from outside the gate. A crowd of knights had gathered, all wanting to become Will's subordinates, including the young guy with the spear. These were the troops who would form Will's temporary army. Erwin looked at the crowd and felt bad for whoever had to lead them. But Erwin explained that that person was actually himself. Since Will was on the mission, his vassal had to take his place. Erwin tried to back out, but the others reassured him. Over the following days, Erwin led the temporary army made up entirely of younger sons of nobles or lordless servants, all chasing glory to elevate their own status. At night, Erwin sat in the tent with the girls. Louise and Ina were starting to feel genuinely scared. It was their first real battle. Moments later, another figure arrived to join the campaign. It was Elise. Since she excelled at healing magic, she had come to help. She asked about Will, and Erwin explained that he had set up camp near the dragon's location, getting ready to strike at dawn. When the sun rose, Will, Bran, and Arms hovered above the dragon's territory, a massive crater filled with claw-shaped rocks. The ancient green dragon sensed them and woke up. It let out a roar, the signal for the battle to begin. Arms used his magic instantly, transforming his own body into armor complete with a shield and a giant hammer. He launched himself high up toward the flying dragon and hammered its head straight down. Will was blown away by Arms' raw power. His magic converted pure mana into physical force, and the armor was far more durable than any normal magic barrier. When Arms drove the dragon into the ground, Bran told Will to get ready. Arms was holding it down with everything he had. Will wondered if it was even necessary, but Bran explained that Arms' magic burned through mana at a rapid pace. If it ran out, he would die. He needed to pin the dragon down long enough for Will to finish things. Arms gave the signal. Will launched the spell, and the dragon was defeated. Back at the army encampment, Elise stood staring into the distance, thinking about Will. Erwin and the others brought her breakfast to cheer her up and introduced her to Will's favorite food, miso soup. The conversation lifted her spirits until a soldier rushed in with news. Will had already won. He had taken down the dragon. On the battlefield, Will stored the dragon's body in the magic bag. The mission's reward wasn't that great, so they planned to sell the body. But Arms and Bran warned him that the hardest part wasn't over yet. Will didn't understand what could possibly be harder than killing a dragon. Bran reminded him that Alfred hadn't died because of a powerful monster, but because he had been overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Hours later, Elise was at the encampment healing wounded soldiers. The monsters were so numerous that injured men kept pouring in from the front line without stopping. The soldiers said the mages were the only reason they were still standing. Hearing that, Elise grew even more worried about Will, but she kept working. She healed through the night until she was forced to tap into the magic stored in the ring Will had given her. Finally, she sat down to rest. The sentinel beside her asked if she was really engaged to the Dragon Slayer. She confirmed it and asked if Will was okay at the front. He told her Will wasn't just okay. He was the reason they were winning. He said that heroes like Will weren't like ordinary people. The words reminded Elise of her conversation with Will, who hated the word hero because of the weight it carried. She felt a pang of sadness knowing the sacrifices Will made, always trying to fulfill a role for everyone else. She promised herself she would stay by his side and fulfill her own role as a saint. She healed as much as she could, and when her magic was completely drained, she asked another nurse for medical tools to keep treating the wounded without magic. Suddenly, a soldier came running and shouting that they had won, but they needed a rescue team because someone had gotten hurt. Elise panicked and ran onto the field, terrified it was Will. She passed through a group of soldiers and found out the injured person was one of Will's brothers, not Will himself. Then someone called her name. It was Will. He was perfectly fine and happy to see her. Seeing him safe and in one piece, Elise felt the tension leave her body and then collapsed from pure exhaustion. When she woke up, Will was sitting right beside her. He told her he'd heard rumors at the front about how she had healed every single soldier who came back injured, and how they had all managed to keep fighting until the end because of the saint's strength. Will stood up to get some water, but she grabbed his hand and told him she now understood why he hated being called a hero. Moments later, Arms walked in and wrapped Elise in a hug. Will was stunned to find out that Arms was Elise's uncle. A few days later, Will and his friends moved their belongings into a new place. Thanks to everything they'd accomplished recently, they were now permanently living in the capital. Elise came by to visit and brought miso soup. Will welcomed her happily. She wanted to clear something up. Since Will was living with Louise and Ina, she'd assumed he was engaged to both of them. Will quickly explained they were just teammates who happened to live with him, but took the opportunity to ask her opinion on concubines. Elise had absolutely no objection, just like everyone else he'd asked before. And because of that, Will simply couldn't say no when Louise and Ina once again offered to become his concubines. The next day, everyone went to attend another wedding. This time, Herman's, Will's second oldest brother, who had gotten married and become a knight. Everyone around Will seemed to be moving forward in life, especially him, with the entire kingdom watching his every step. Every morning, Louise, Ina, and Erwin went out running together. Erwin constantly complained that the girls were strengthening themselves with magic and wished he had enough mana to keep up with them. During the run, they looked up and spotted Will casually flying above them. Later, Bran told the girls that Duke Amadeus had ordered them to compete in the tournament as well. They needed to prove they were noble women in both name and ability. The girls immediately stopped running and started training without magic. Erwin, on the other hand, was sprawled out lazily on the couch, convinced that even if he lost, nothing would change. But Bran warned him that if he kept it up, he'd look like dead weight to the team and could get cut. At dinner, Will announced that Fawn, the previous tournament champion, had stepped back to give others a shot, which meant everyone's chances of making a name for themselves had gone up. Will then asked if Elise could join the team and everyone agreed, since her healing magic was essential. Erwin, though, panicked at the thought of being overshadowed and shouted that he would win the tournament no matter what. The next morning, Erwin ran at full speed and blew past the girls. Meanwhile, Will was barely holding himself together trying to keep up. During weapons practice, Will could hardly control his sword. Later, while everyone else was training, Will had passed out from exhaustion. Erwin pushed himself so hard his hands started bleeding, but he refused to stop. The girls were starting to think he might actually win, but then bad news dropped. The king had ordered Farron to participate as a benchmark for the younger nobles. Erwin was crushed and locked himself in his room. The girls tried to cheer him up, insisting that losing wasn't the end of the world, but he snapped back, saying they couldn't understand his frustration because they had magic and he didn't. Hurt by his words, the girls left him alone. The next morning, Erwin asked Will whether he'd be kicked off the team if he lost the tournament, but Will was still asleep. When he finally woke up, he admitted that the one he was actually worried about was Elise, who had never trained physically and was scared about joining the team. Hearing that made Erwin realize each of them was carrying their own fears. He apologized to the girls and patched things up. On the day of the tournament, everyone headed to the arena. Elise showed up carrying a lunchbox for them to eat after the fights. Will's first battle was a rude awakening. He'd been drawn against Fane, the previous champion. Will drew his sword. The bell rang, and Farron moved instantly, drove the pommel of his sword into Will's stomach, and knocked him out in 1 second. After coming to, Will quietly went back to his seat and sat there sipping tea with his friends while watching the rest of the fights. Erwin kept advancing steadily in the sword category. Ina kept moving up in the lance category. Louise advanced in hand-to-hand combat, but got knocked out in the semifinals. Bran praised her for getting that far, especially since her magic punch style was completely useless in a no-magic tournament. Ina made it to the lance final, where her opponent was the young guy who had previously tried to become Will's vassal. The moment he saw her, he lit up, imagining Will might be watching. He surged forward, throwing rapid thrusting attacks. Ina tried to counter, but he deflected her strikes and then executed his signature move, spinning his lance until hers flew right out of her hands. She came back to the group and admitted she'd lost, saying her opponent, RDE, was frighteningly strong. He came from a merchant family and was also skilled in accounting and law, but Will wasn't catching any of this. He was dead asleep from exhaustion because he'd made all the food Elise had brought. Meanwhile, Erwin won his semi-final, but took a deep cut to the shoulder. His next opponent would be Farron. The girls patched him up while the officials pushed him to drop out, but Erwin had made up his mind. He was going through with it. The girls told him they knew Bran had gotten inside his head with some harsh words. Erwin admitted it was true and that he was terrified of becoming a burden, but the girls held up the lunchbox Will had prepared, proof that Will would never leave anyone behind. Erwin took a bite, got to his feet, and declared that as a member of Will's team, backing down wasn't an option. A few days later, Erwin and Ina began training under Farron's guidance. Louise, on the other hand, asked Will to train with her and her instructor. To Will's shock, the instructor was Arms himself. Will agreed to train with them, and with that, the next chapter of his journey began. 3 years later, deep in the countryside of the kingdom, Will's family was still struggling to recover their farmlands. Kurt was going through tax documents when his wife walked in to let him know that visitors from the capital had arrived. He found it strange that anyone would travel that far, but his expression shifted to irritation when he found out the matter involved his little brother Will. In the main hall, the visitor delivered a letter from the royal auditor. Kurt passed it to his wife dismissively, assuming it was just another request to join Will's household. He told the visitor he didn't care how famous Will had become. But suddenly, his wife screamed as she read the message. Will had died while exploring ancient ruins. A few days earlier, Will had finally become an officially registered adventurer, thrilled to break free from the obligations of being a noble. His first mission was a request from the king to investigate ancient ruins. Will's team entered the ruins with Bran as their guide. Bran explained that many adventurers had already been sent in, but none had come back. Even elite adventurers sent to find them had vanished. The guild suspected a dragon was inhabiting the ruins, and nobody was better suited for that than the dragon slayers led by Will. As they pushed forward, Will called out his team for constantly hiding behind him. Before opening the door to the ruins, Bran used detection magic. Inside, they found nothing, no trace of the missing adventurers. Suddenly, Bran sensed danger and screamed for them to run, but it was too late. The doors slammed shut. A magic circle appeared beneath their feet, and their legs locked in place. Bran warned them to brace for anything. It was a trap left behind by an ancient magical civilization. One by one, each of them started disappearing. Elise tried to grab hold of Will, but he vanished the moment she reached him. And seconds later, she disappeared too. When they came to, they found themselves in a completely different chamber, with a symbol on the wall marked as reverse suspension. Bran theorized that the teleportation had dropped them at the deepest level of the ruins, which left only one option: go up to escape. Louise wasn't scared at all, assuming Will could just teleport them out. But Will explained that his teleportation required precise knowledge of both the starting point and the destination, something impossible in that moment. The only way out was up. They reached the next level. Elise clung tightly to Will, who smiled and told her it was going to be okay. Stepping into another chamber, the door slammed shut, and golem guardians activated all around them. Will prepared to cast a spell, but the others stopped him. Since they had no idea how many floors were left, they needed to conserve Will's mana. The three of them fought the golems, while Bran and Will supported them with limited spells. After the fight, Elise healed their injuries. Ina noticed skeletons propped against the walls, and Bran guessed they belonged to the adventurers who had gone missing before them. The next stairwell was packed with golems too. The team fought again, and again, floor after floor. Outside the ruins, 5 days had passed. The king in arms were growing anxious, and nobles were whispering that Will was probably dead. In fact, plenty of nobles were quietly pleased with the idea. When the priest passed by, they expressed concern for his granddaughter, but he said Will and Elise were still alive. Nearby, a noble named Rukner was listening in. Some nobles wondered who had started the rumor about Will's death. The truth was that it came from a noble trying to get promoted to commissioner. He had even sent a message to Kurt announcing Will's death, hoping Will's title would pass to Kurt's children. Meanwhile, inside the ruins, the team was running on fumes after 5 straight days of non-stop fighting. Even so, Will did his best to keep the mood up while sharing a meal with Elise. They slept only 2 hours at a time, constantly cycling between combat and rest. Floor after floor, they took down every golem waiting for them. The exhaustion kept piling up and their injuries kept getting worse. The next chamber was bigger, packed with even more golems. Elise healed Erwin, who was starting to worry they'd die in there. She encouraged him, and Erwin swore he couldn't die yet, not before he beat Fawn someday. His words gave her a fresh wave of resolve. Before entering the next floor, Elise told Will they had to make it out, and that if they died in there, she'd regret never having married him. Her words gave him a boost, and they pushed on. To everyone's surprise, the next room was a massive, completely empty space. No golems, but Bran stayed on edge. In the distance, he spotted a colossal statue. It slowly woke up and opened its wings. It was a golem dragon. Bran threw up a barrier instantly, and within seconds the dragon attacked. Will reinforced the shield with magic, but golems burst through the side doors and went after Ina. More golems kept pouring in, surrounding them from every direction. Will and Bran held the dragon while Erwin and Louise fought off the golems closing in on them. Elise desperately healed Ina, burning through every last bit of mana she had, including the stored magic in the ring Will had given her. If the fight kept going, Will and Bran would burn out, and the dragon would kill them all. That's when Will made his call. He would take down the dragon alone. Bran doubted they could pierce the dragon's mithril body, but chose to trust Will. He transferred what remained of his own mana to him. Will hit back against the dragon's breath with a powerful spell. Bran collapsed, happy watching Will, who reminded him so much of Alfred. Will faced the dragon alone. The creature's power was overwhelming. Will felt himself fading and silently apologized to his friends. But then, Elise screamed that she was going to use the miracle light spell. In one swift move, she kissed Will and collapsed. Will caught her in his arms and felt the magic explode inside him. His power burst open. He unleashed his attack with everything he had. The dragon fell. With the dragon dead, the remaining golems shut down, letting the others rush in to pull Will and Elise to safety, both of them unconscious. Hours later, Will came to and found Louise and Ina debating the battle. The miracle light spell replenished physical strength and in rare cases could restore mana, but it didn't actually require a kiss, which meant Elise had used it as an excuse on purpose, because she couldn't stand the thought of dying without kissing the man she loved. When Will and Elise woke up together, they joined Bran, who was surveying the new space around them. He realized that the creator of this place was a famous ancient mage known for crafting magical devices. The entire ruins had probably been built as a test to find someone worthy of his legacy. Erwin called them over excitedly. They had found something incredible. A massive shipyard full of ancient aircraft. These aircraft were identical to the models the kingdom used as prototypes for modern designs. Then Erwin hit a button, a wall shifted, and finally they found the exit to the ancient ruins. Because of the discovery of the 7 ancient aircraft inside the ruins, along with the magic stones powering them, the golem beasts, and the research left behind, each member of Will's team was rewarded with 2 million gold coins, more than enough to never worry about money again. After that, Will informed Arms they would be leaving the capital and focusing their adventures in the Duchy region. Arms promised to track down whoever had spread the rumor of Will's death, which caught Will completely off guard, since he'd had no idea any of it had happened while he was gone. It was clear that plenty of nobles were jealous of Will's success and had been spreading nasty rumors about him. Ina pointed out that the nobles were also irritated by how close the team was to Will. Now that each of them had 2 million gold coins, they'd attract even more unwanted attention. To sidestep that, they decided to use the guild system to redistribute the reward money. Instead of each person keeping their 2 million, they chose to hand the full amount over to Will. And since Elise was Will's fiancée, she offered all of her assets to him as well. In short, Will suddenly found himself richer by 10 million gold coins. Meanwhile, Rock, the noble who wanted Will dead, was holding a secret meeting with other nobles plotting against him. They agreed to pool their influence to take him out. Outside Will's mansion, a hooded girl watched quietly while Will and the group ate cookies inside. Will sensed movement near the window, but when he looked out, nobody was there. Even so, he decided they needed a guard for the mansion when they left. With so many people resentful of him, they needed someone strong and loyal. The group immediately suggested they finally hire Rude, the spear swordsman. He'd been trying to become Will's servant for 3 years, and when Will finally said yes, Rude broke down in tears of pure joy. Will sensed movement again outside the window, but the girl disappeared before he could get a look at her. Later that day, the girl tried to spy again and spotted them eating lunch, but this time the others felt her presence. Louise sprinted to the window, and Erwin positioned himself between the window and Will. When they looked outside, the spy was gone. Rude swore he'd catch her and advised Will to leave the capital as soon as possible, but Will said there was still something he had to take care of first. Right then, the spy took off running through the city. That afternoon, Will and his friends visited the Magic Guild, the organization studying the teleportation spell Will had discovered in the ancient ruins. The guild master, Lucas, welcomed them and demonstrated a new magic circle capable of summoning whatever the caster imagined. Erwin joked that thieves would love a device like that. Will gave it a shot himself. He closed his eyes and focused on what he wanted. After a moment, something appeared, but it was a witch's outfit. The witch who had been summoned smacked Will, who insisted he'd been distracted by the conversation about thieves and hadn't meant to call her at all. He tried again and pulled it off. The flash of light was enormous, suggesting he'd summoned something massive. Later, the spy spotted Will and his friends leaving the guild, hauling a giant cart. She tried to follow them, but Will used teleportation, and they were home in an instant. Meanwhile, outside Rock's mansion, RDE spotted nobles boarding a carriage to continue the conspiracy against Will, and caught Rock laughing from an upper-floor window. The spy made her way back to Will's mansion. Peering through the window again, she saw Will setting up an enormous feast. It was clearly a farewell party, as a thank you to everyone who had supported him. Duke Amadeus, Arms, Bran, and even Priest Hall. Then Will brought out a huge platter piled high with tuna sushi, the very thing he had summoned using the guild's teleportation circle. The nobles were curious about how to eat this strange dish, so Will showed them how to dip it in soy sauce, something he had spent 3 years perfecting. The guests went absolutely crazy over it, while the spy continued watching from outside. At the same time, Rude informed Will that Rock was the one who had spread the rumors of his death in the ruins. Will was confused since he'd never even spoken to Rock. Rude explained that Rock did it to undermine Ruckner, Rock's own brother, who had a close connection to Will. Rock had also sent a messenger to Will's family hoping Kurt would feel indebted to him, and that when Kurt's children inherited Will's title, Rock would gain influence. Fortunately, RDE revealed he had a plan to keep the royal auditor tied up for days at Rock's own mansion. Before long, Rock found out that rumors blaming him for spreading the news of Will's death had circulated all across the capital and made it all the way to the royal palace. He was summoned. This was Rude's counterstrike, fighting lies with more lies. Rude also let one more truth slip. He was actually Rock's illegitimate son. Later, Elise arrived with more tuna for the group, but the spy outside couldn't hold herself back anymore. She burst into the mansion and walked straight toward Will with an unsettling aura. Erwin tried to stop her, but she tossed him aside like it was nothing. She walked right up to Will, and then stopped in front of the table and ate a piece of sushi. Lord Edgar, the kingdom's general, walked in and introduced the girl as his daughter, Wilma. Wilma explained that she'd been watching Will all day to figure out whether he was capable of feeding her. She'd observed all the tea, the snacks, and the sushi he'd been enjoying, and cheerfully declared that Will had passed her test. Then she headed out with Elise to look for more food. Lord Edgar apologized for his daughter's behavior. Bran commented that Wilma appeared to have hero syndrome, meaning her body generated mana continuously, making her extraordinarily strong and giving her a massive appetite. Ina and Elise instantly adored her, and both wanted to pile her plate with even more fatty tuna. Lord Edgar asked Will to take Wilma on as his personal bodyguard, and even offered her as a potential bride. Will turned it down and explained he just wanted to keep adventuring and hunting monsters in the duchy. But that answer made Lord Edgar stop and think. He turned to Duke Amadeus and asked whether he really intended to let Will run around hunting monsters freely. Duke Amadeus looked at Will and said he had a special mission prepared for him. A few days later, Kurt was still staring at the letter announcing Will's death. The message also explained how his own son could inherit the title Will had supposedly left behind. Kurt laughed at the unexpected stroke of luck until his wife screamed at something she saw outside. When Kurt looked, he found Will and his companions standing right in front of him. Will, the team, and Bran sat down with Kurt for a meeting. They explained that the former Duke had led an expedition through their forest 15 years ago in search of medicinal herbs. The expedition ended in disaster. 2,000 soldiers died. Those soldiers had become zombies, and the current Duke had tasked Will with the mission of purifying them. They then discussed resource management of the monsters. Since the enchanted forest fell under Kurt's domain, he would receive a percentage of the resources collected there. The accountant, Claw, explained that the standard cut was 30%, but Kurt pushed for 50%. It was completely unreasonable, especially after Bran said they were willing to return the fallen soldiers' personal belongings to the people of the territory. Herman, the second oldest brother, tried to calm Kurt down, but Kurt wouldn't budge. He argued that the soldiers had very little to begin with and insisted the funerals had already been held. Elise stepped in, explaining that funerals meant nothing without the bodies being properly purified, which was exactly why she was prepared to hold the ceremonies again after the mission. Kurt mocked her, accusing her of fishing for donations for the church. His attitude sent Erwin over the edge, and he nearly threw hands with him. Will quickly jumped in to break it up. The others reminded Kurt that they were there to negotiate with the lord of the territory, not with the heir. Kurt almost kicked off another scene, but the tension was broken by the sound of Wilma's stomach growling at full volume. That night, Kurt held a private meeting with the men of the region. They were relieved that their sons and brothers would finally be purified and find peace. But Kurt insisted Will had only come for business, not to visit his family. Meanwhile, the rest of the group had dinner at the house. Herman explained to Will that their oldest brother had grown increasingly anxious ever since Will left home. Kurt had always been terrified that Will would come back one day and take his place. Herman's wife, Marlene, arrived with food and scolded Herman for not offering Bran something to drink. Bran declined. Marlene encouraged Will in his mission, revealing that her grandfather had been one of the men who died during the expedition 15 years ago. Will promised to return any of her grandfather's belongings he found. She thanked him and said she hoped he would become the heir someday. The group started to worry they might be getting pulled into inheritance politics. The next day, Will's team entered the enchanted forest to start the mission. They provoked the dead soldiers out loud. Even though the zombies had limited intelligence, they understood the insult and started showing up. Elise cast a magic circle and she and Will raised a purification barrier. When the zombies crossed it, they vanished instantly. Erwin felt completely useless because the barrier was doing all the work, but Bran said that collecting the belongings of the dead was also part of the mission. They kept going until most of the undead had disappeared. Even the former Duke showed up and was purified when he touched the barrier. Only Marlene's grandfather remained. While they waited, a wyvern suddenly attacked. Wilma dropped it with a single strike, and and the purification magic activated. Shortly after, countless dead animals appeared and started attacking. The team moved as one and wiped out everything that emerged. Hours passed and the exhaustion set in. The purification magic started to weaken. Marlene's grandfather finally appeared, but to everyone's shock, he spoke. He had evolved into a lich. He asked about his granddaughter and Will told him she was doing great, married, and still very much running the show at home. Satisfied, the lich set down his sword and let Elise purify him. After completing the mission, they returned all of the dead's belongings to their families. The villagers thanked Will, but Kurt suddenly appeared to make an announcement. He ordered the villagers to hand over all the armor and weapons they had collected. The villagers pushed back. They wanted to bury the armor since they hadn't been able to bury their loved ones. Kurt insisted he needed the metal for farming tools. To satisfy both sides, Will summoned an enormous block of iron and handed it to Kurt. Kurt was irritated, but since Will would be leaving soon, he walked away without picking a fight. Duke Amadeus promised Will they would investigate and return any unclaimed belongings. Relieved, Will thought the mission was finally over, hoping to escape the family drama, but the Duke warned him to stay ready. As Will and the group headed out, Duke Amadeus and Ruckner watched from a distance, declaring that their plan was still in motion. When the team returned, the accountant asked if they wanted to attend the funeral. The next day, Elise led the ceremony. The villagers were even more furious with Kurt, who didn't even show up to his own people's funeral. That afternoon, a large celebration was held to honor the dead. The villagers offered Will wine, but he turned it down and insisted it go to Bran, who also declined, to Will's surprise. Later, Kurt's wife Amelie arrived with the kids to pay their respects. The children were fascinated by Will and asked him to tell them stories. Ina and Louise put on a whole performance recapping Will's past achievements, after which Will handed out sweets he'd made to the kids. When the celebration wrapped up, Will ran into the accountant again. The accountant asked Will to become the new heir of the territory. Will's jaw dropped, but the accountant insisted it was what the people wanted. They had no future under Kurt's leadership. Will said all he wanted was to be an adventurer, but the village chief said he could appoint someone like Rude to handle the day-to-day affairs. Will could keep adventuring while serving as their lord. Then Bran appeared and told Will that this was also the wish of the royal family. Later that night, Bran laid out the full truth of the king's plan. The king had wanted to develop the southern lands for years, but the regional rulers were weak, and the current heir, Kurt, was incompetent and short-sighted. The king couldn't force their father to retire without irritating other nobles, so he cooked up something cleaner: send Will back home, provoke Kurt into committing a crime, and then force their father to step down early to take responsibility. The moment their father retired, Will, now a celebrated hero beloved by the villagers, would become the natural successor. Bran hadn't touched a drop of alcohol all night so he could stay sharp. He knew Kurt was unpredictable. Even the enormous sums of money Will had earned weren't a coincidence. They were preparation to fund the future development of the lands. The next morning, Will filled the team in on everything. They were baffled. Will never questioned a royal order, but it made sense when they saw him goofing around with his nephews. Becoming the ruler would mean taking away those children's future as nobles. Unfortunately, the accountant overheard everything. That night, a crowd of villagers crashed Will's dinner. They demanded to meet with him and begged him to accept the position of heir before he left. Bran noticed the accountant spying from the bushes. He confronted him and warned that the king despised it when commoners meddled in royal strategy. Even the mere rumor that Will was leaving soon was dangerous enough. The accountant left, but not before warning Bran about Amelie, Kurt's wife, and the warning was right on the money. That very same night, Amelie overheard Kurt ordering loyal villagers to punish anyone who tried to support Will. By morning, Will still didn't know what to decide. Bran then confessed the final truth. If Will accepted the position, Kurt wouldn't just be removed, he would be eliminated to prevent future conflict. During the next meeting, Will tried one more time to reach a peaceful resolution. He asked Kurt for some undeveloped land to manage and promised to help him get promoted and support him financially. The two brothers could grow together, and the region would thrive. But Kurt recoiled in disgust. He was convinced Will was trying to trick him, stealing his authority piece by piece. He ordered Will to get out immediately. Outside the mansion, Will ran into Amelie. He admitted that no matter what he offered, nobody would be satisfied. He just wanted a way forward that didn't hurt anyone. But now he felt completely lost. Amelie saw the truth in his eyes. She confessed that all she cared about was her children's safety. She had spent years trying to bring Will closer to the kids, hoping he'd feel compassion for them when the time came. Will thanked her quietly and walked away. Later that night, back at the house, Will finally made his decision. He would accept the position, but he swore not to let a single person die, not even Kurt. The team agreed without hesitation. The next morning, they opened up shops in town. Will with spices, Louise with clothing, Ina with crafts, and Erwin with weapons. The townspeople flooded in immediately. Kurt's followers started to panic. Will's new businesses were swiping all their customers. They went to complain to Kurt, some even asking if they could just kill Will. Kurt shot it down. He knew Will was a mage. Any attempt would end in instant annihilation. When Kurt's followers headed back to the village, they found themselves surrounded by Will's team. Nobody got hurt. Instead, Will offered them money and training resources to upgrade their own businesses. The gesture was enough to flip every one of Kurt's men against him. Meanwhile, Will and Rude were scouting safe houses for Emily and her children, places they would move to once Kurt's downfall became public. As for Kurt, the plan was to send him to the church, where his removal would look like an act of mercy rather than a death sentence. All Will needed now was to convince the priest. But another scheme was already in motion. Rock, the noble who had conspired against Will before, handed a servant a mysterious artifact, an ancient magical item, and ordered it delivered to Kurt. A few days later, Kurt was furious when only one villager showed up to his meeting. Everyone had switched sides and was backing Will. Even that last man admitted Will had offered him training in the capital. He quickly walked out, leaving Kurt completely alone. Backed into a corner, powerless and paranoid, Kurt finally snapped. He grabbed a knife and prepared to kill Will himself, but Rock's servant stopped him. The man said a knife was useless. Then he revealed the artifact, a magical relic known as the Dragon Flute. Days later, Bran sensed Kurt heading alone into the forest, where Will's team had intentionally spread rumors to lure him. When they came face to face, Kurt ordered Will's servants to leave. He accused Will of stealing his success and his rightful position, and then revealed the magical tool, the Dragon Flute. Bran recognized the danger immediately. The flute was supposed to summon all the dragons from the nearby mountains, and Will's magic alone wouldn't be enough. Elise tried to appeal to Kurt's heart, but he didn't care about the villagers anymore. He claimed they had betrayed him, and that he would build a new family after becoming a hero and taking over Will's mansion. Bran tried to shatter the flute, but it didn't crack even slightly. Kurt blew into it. To his shock, no dragon appeared. Instead, dark spirits began gathering around him. Bran realized the truth. That wasn't the legendary dragon flute. It was the evil flute. It absorbed the malice around it and granted the user enough strength to defeat their enemy, but at the cost of turning them into an undead monster. Kurt's body twisted into a massive creature consumed by dark spirits, and the darkness swallowed his thoughts as his glowing eyes locked onto Will. Bran urged Will to use sacred magic immediately, insisting Kurt was already gone. The monster attacked, and Elise blocked the first strike with a barrier, ready to give everything she had. Realizing there was no way to save his brother, Will asked her to expand the sacred field. With one last look at what remained of Kurt, Will unleashed his sacred magic. The light purified the monster, and the evil flute fell to the ground. In that instant, Kurt's twisted spirit tore across the kingdom. It crashed through the window of Rock's mansion, where Rock was talking about using his son Rod against Will, and took Rock's life. The next day, knights sealed off Rock's mansion. Will and Rod learned that Rock and the conspirators had all died in the spirit's attack, and the priests purified the remains. The spirit had been part of the monster Will had destroyed, but Kurt's hatred steered it straight to Rock. Emily and the children ended up moving in with Herman. Will felt a deep bitterness. He hated being called a hero when he had failed to save his own brother. He hated that every noble had hidden schemes, and hated even more that he had become one of them. Bran reminded him that he was a noble now, and nobles always had plans. Will spent the day in silence, wrestling with the hypocrisy of that world and his own place in it. That night, Elise confessed that sometimes she could feel him pulling away. She took his hand. Will gave a small smile and promised he'd try to be a better noble from then on. When the king summoned him, he granted Will all the undeveloped lands and asked what reward he wanted next. Will requested the personal right to grant noble titles, specifically from the 12 that had gone vacant after Rock's death. The king erupted in fury, with Edgar and the high priest right behind him. Duke Amadeus defended Will, while the others accused him of trying to expand the political power of his territory. Arms stepped in, asked Will to withdraw the request, and immediately put in his own claim for a portion of the land. The king shut the whole debate down and denied Arms's request, insisting only Will would develop those lands. At the same time, Arms secretly signaled Will that the plan had worked, proving just how sharp and strong he really was. The king granted Will the right to bestow 2 noble titles and elevated his rank to count. He praised everyone's performance, except Arms's, whose move had been way too obvious. Arms laughed, knowing he'd been caught. Back in the countryside, Will told Amali he intended to grant the 2 noble titles to her children when they grew up. She thanked him, knowing that one day the kids would understand their father's fate had been the result of his own choices. Will got to work developing the new lands, expanding the territory, building new facilities for the church, and planning the districts that would be overseen by Ruckner, Edgar, and Amadeus. And at night he sat with his friends around the dinner table, finally at peace. And that's a wrap for today. If you're into anime recaps like this one, drop anything in the comments. I always read every single one. Check out this other video too, you're gonna love it. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.